Hello and welcome back to my How to Start a Megabase series. Today we are taking a look at legendary carbon fiber, which is probably the most difficult legendary item to obtain in large numbers. There are two things that make legendary carbon fiber as annoying as it is. First, it requires Umako mesh, which cannot be efficiently upcycled by itself. And second, the sheer numbers I need. By the time I transition into a megabase, I suddenly find myself craving for large amounts of legendary carbon fiber. And it's probably these amounts that make it so annoying. Or am I just a little too impatient and greedy? But let's take a look at all the nice things I could build if only I had enough legendary carbon fiber, or for that matter, quantum processors. Legendary fusion reactors, 91 carbon fiber each. Legendary fusion generators, 18 carbon fiber a pop. 1 megabase sized power plant with 12 reactors and 108 generators. Unaffordable. A single legendary railgun, 56 carbon fiber. Legendary rocket turrets, 20. And legendary spidertrons, also 20 carbon fiber. Luckily, I already upcycle stack inserters independently. Otherwise, I would probably crash out. Enough lamenting. Let's find a solution. For this video, I revisited all the dead ends that I tried over time in pursuit of legendary carbon fiber. Let's start by looking at fruit upcycling. Can't we just upcycle Umako mesh all the way to legendary? Although possible in theory, it's not practical in a real playthrough. You would simply need too many Umako farms. I'm not saying you can't do it, just that I wouldn't. It's too much effort and pollution. Let's for a brief moment visit Akilo and look for other solutions there. How about railgun upcycling, since railguns are made in cryogenic plants? With 8 legendary quality modules, we get 50% chance to roll for higher quality. Well, while this would be possible, and while I have done it in the past, I find it a bit too complex. It requires quite sophisticated interplanetary logistics and therefore takes comparatively long to set up. But nonetheless, I benchmarked it for this video with this design here and had it run continuously for 10 hours. It produced an average of 153 legendary carbon fibers per hour, plus an additional 763 legendary quantum processors. If I also recycle the latter, I'd get a total of 344 legendary carbon fibers per hour. But now take a look at the inputs needed. Just the normal quality carbon fiber alone amounts to 15 per second. You would have to launch one rocket every 30 seconds on Glebber. However, if you have the infrastructure for this, it might actually be a very efficient way to get legendary carbon fiber and quantum processors. You would also get legendary railguns. So while this isn't my preferred design, let me at least quickly explain it. It's basically just a row of 4 legendary cryogenic plants with recipes set for the lower 4 qualities of railguns. One recycling machine at the bottom recycles all railguns, including excess legendary ones. And due to the high demand of fluoroketone and quantum processors, it's probably best to build it on Akilo. Speaking of Akilo, let's take a look at my second contender for legendary carbon fiber, quantum processor upcycling. This also heavily relies on space logistics, so I won't use this early on in my playthroughs. But it's nonetheless viable and definitely a nice challenge to set up. As you can see, it requires quite the number of recycling machines and quality modules, because we use productivity modules and speed beacons in the EMPs and utilize high throughput. By the way, using productivity over quality modules generally yields more legendary items, so this is the recommended way to do it. Don't use quality modules for recipes that support productivity modules. In my benchmark, this design produced roughly 240 legendary carbon fiber per hour, while only consuming less than 3 normal quality ones per second. You would only need to launch rockets every 3 minutes on Glebber. So if you have more than enough legendary quality modules and spaceships, you could build this design, or even 2 or 3 times, and upcycle carbon fiber this way. It's basically 5 legendary EMPs for normal quality quantum processors, 2 for green quality, and 1 each for blue and purple quality, all with productivity modules and speed beacons. The output then feeds into a long row of legendary recycling machines, 44 in total. The outputs are then handled by robots. But since this was just a quick and dirty design for me to benchmark it, you could probably build it a bit simpler or more efficient. However, due to the sheer size of it and the interplanetary logistics required, this is also not the design I would want to build in my playthroughs. Instead, I would upcycle carbon fiber via tool belts with this design. I have used it before in at least 2 of my recent playthroughs. It has some positives, but also some negatives. On the positive side, it's rather simple. It doesn't require interplanetary logistics. And I'm probably on Clever anyway to set up a whole bunch of different legendary upcyclers, like the one for legendary stack inserters that I showed in my previous video. And lastly, it produces just legendary carbon fiber, which is very versatile. I can then craft whatever I need most of directly, be it quantum processors or rocket turrets. But there's also some negatives. Of all designs showcased so far, this design requires the highest amount of normal quality carbon fiber as input, which in turn also requires some upscaling on Clever. And secondly, this design produces only 312 legendary carbon fiber per hour. If you remember the costs of the items on my legendary wishlist, you can safely assume that the real cost for these items is time. For example, my legendary Promethium ship alone will need more than 3,800 legendary carbon fiber, for which this design will take more than 12 hours to accumulate. And that's why I consider legendary carbon fiber to be annoying. Once I need it in the thousands. But that's also why it's important to build this or any design early on, so the goodies can start to accumulate. There's still plenty of work to be done on other things, like getting legendary biolabs or scaling up science production, before I eventually build my Promethium ship. Now let's quickly go through the design process, and let's also include a sub-factory for the required normal quality carbon fiber. I'll actually start with that. We need roughly 26 normal quality carbon fiber per second, which is not easy to achieve. I assume that I would not yet have access to legendary biochambers, but that I do have access to all other items in legendary quality, including stack inserters. 26 carbon fiber requires around 21 raw Yumako fruits per second, which is just shy of 3 plantations. My first step would therefore be to add 3 more Yumako plantations. Let's assume that I have done this and that the Yumako fruits arrive on this belt here. For the nutrients, we need roughly 1.3 bioflux per second, which should not be that big of a deal. I will take them from this belt here. And eventually, these 2 inputs will yield 26.6 carbon fiber per second, which I want to output here in the middle. I start with 4 biochambers for the carbon fiber here, with productivity modules. As a reminder, in this design, biochambers are the only item that is not yet of legendary quality, so I'll stop mentioning it from now on. Just remember to use legendary items for everything else. I also add a speed beacon down here. And as always with production chains on Clever, we need to think of a gazillion inputs and outputs. Let's start with a Yumako mesh and add 2 biochambers here. They can direct insert into the carbon fiber ones. On Clever, I'm a big fan of setting filters on all inserters to visualize their responsibilities. It also prevents inserters from picking up the wrong items, such as spoilage. The finished carbon fiber can go onto a belt down here to be brought out on the right side. There, I also add a small buffer for 2000 carbon fiber, because I also need some of it for export. The second ingredient for carbon fiber is regular carbon. For this, I add 4 biochambers above, but leave a 3 wide gap. I then use long-handed inserters to direct insert the carbon. These biochambers also need a speed beacon, so I add one above. If you've been asking yourself what this gap is for, I can give you the answer. This is where I put my loop-de-loop for nutrients and spoilage, which also requires plenty of inserters. One to insert nutrients into a biochamber, and one to take the spoilage out. But I only need to configure this once and can then use copy and paste. And lastly, I add a heating tower to burn any spoilage that lands on the belt. But we are still missing one output at the bottom, Yumako seeds. I highly recommend never burning or destroying any seeds. At one point in my last playthrough, I had over 200,000 Yumako seeds, until I didn't. I'll explain why they are so valuable in a later video. Anyways, I add active provider chests to get rid of the seeds. Now we need to provide spoilage to the biochambers for carbon. The easiest way to get spoilage is to recycle nutrients. So I add 4 recyclers facing directly into the biochambers to save some inserters. And finally, we need one last biochamber for nutrients, which I add here. This also provides nutrients for the loop-de-loop down here, so let's start with that. I add a stack inserter, limit the stack size to 4 and wire it to the looping belt. I configure the belt to read its content, then set the inserter to keep at least 200 nutrients on the loop. Next, I need to provide nutrients to these 2 recyclers on the left side. I then do the same for the ones on the right, but this time I route them a bit differently so they also feed the biochamber itself. And finally, we need to remember that everything can and will eventually spoil. So I add one last belt here to bring any spoilage down towards my heating tower. Let's now provide some initial nutrients to this top biochamber and watch the design come to life. It takes just a few seconds for all machines to start working and our first carbon fiber comes out on the right. Oh, and here's one more neat micro-optimization. Connect the seed inserter to the biochamber, enable read contents, and only activate the inserter once there are at least 4 seeds in the biochamber. This greatly reduces robot traffic, since robots can carry 4 items at once. And that's the normal quality carbon fiber build done. This was also the difficult part of the whole upcycler for legendary carbon fiber. The rest of the design is relatively straightforward. In addition to carbon fiber, we need 8 red circuits per second, which I assume are somewhere close by. Let's bring both inputs together on a belt and start building the actual upcycler here. Since the crafting speed of tool belts is quite low, I place a total of 12 assembling machines for the normal quality ones, each with quality modules. Above those, I add 2 more machines for green quality and 1 each for blue and purple quality. I then bring the belt with the carbon fiber and red circuits all the way up and also add input inserters. Next, I add a long belt for all the outputs. I also add output inserters and my beloved but completely optional memory cells. Down here, I add a storage chest to keep a buffer of 20 legendary tool belts for personal use, for example in my mech armor or Spidertrons. To recycle the tool belts, I need a total of 3 recycling machines. And don't forget the quality modules. The output of the recyclers can go directly onto a belt this time. First, let's filter out the goodies, our legendaries. They can simply go into these 2 chests. And by the way, don't worry about the red circuits. Before this single legendary storage chest fills up and jams the system, you'll probably have rebuilt your entire Glabber factory a couple of times. Next, I filter out the normal quality ingredients and sort them onto different sides of a belt with filtered stack inserters. I then feed them back into the main input line using a priority splitter. All higher quality ingredients move up on this belt here. The green quality items go first into a buffer chest here and then to the 2 assemblers for green quality tool belts. Finally, I handle the blue and purple quality ingredients with 2 separate buffer chests here. And that's our upcycler for legendary carbon fiber done. All that's left now is time, because 312 items per hour won't get us very far. If you're really desperate, you could of course duplicate the build. But since we still have plenty of other legendary items to work on, it's probably enough to just let it run in the background and accumulate carbon fiber over time. I still find legendary carbon fiber a bit unsatisfying. This is because, at least to my knowledge, there simply isn't a perfect solution. If you want to do it on Akilo by upcycling railguns, that's also a valid approach. The higher output might justify the overhead of having to implement a stable and efficient interplanetary logistics network. However, This design here can be up and running in just a few minutes. At least for now, it remains my preferred way of getting legendary carbon fiber. But I'm still curious, how do you solve legendary carbon fiber? Are there even better ways that I didn't think of? Let me know in the comments. You can find the blueprints of the designs in the video description. If you liked this content, please leave a like and hit subscribe. Thanks and bye!